When the baby screamed for the third time in 10 minutes, every head on the airplane slowly turned toward the man in seat 14C. The sound cut through the cabin like a sharp knife. His face burned red, his hands shook, and the tiny girl pressed against his chest cried so hard her breath came in broken gasps. People shifted in their seats. Some sighed loud on purpose. A few rolled their eyes without shame. One woman leaned toward her husband and muttered that this was going to be a long flight. Mark felt all of it, without looking up. He stared at the floor, wishing he could disappear into it. This was his worst fear coming true. He had imagined this moment for weeks and prayed it would not happen. But now it was happening, and there was no way to stop it. Lily's cries grew louder as the plane climbed higher. The pressure hurt her ears, and she did not understand why. All she knew was pain and fear. Mark held her close, rocking back and forth in his narrow seat, whispering soft words that used to calm her at home. They did nothing now. Mark was 32 years old, but in that moment he felt like a scared boy. He had not flown since he was a teenager, and never with a baby, never alone. His wife had always been the calm one, the one who knew what to do. But she was gone now, gone for months. The house had been too quiet since then, and his heart too heavy. This trip was meant to be a new start, a move closer to his sister in North Carolina, a chance to breathe again. Instead, it felt like another failure piling on top of all the others. He tried everything he could think of. He bounced Lily gently. He offered her a bottle. He pressed a pacifier to her lips. He even pulled out the small stuffed bear she usually loved, worn soft from being hugged so many times. Nothing worked. Lily screamed until her little face turned red and wet with tears. Mark's arms ached, but he did not stop holding her. He would never stop holding her. Around him, the whispers spread like a cold wind. People spoke just loud enough to be heard. Complaints about parents, complaints about babies, complaints about the noise. Each word hit Mark like a punch to the chest. He was not angry at them. He was tired. Tired in his bones. He had not slept more than a few hours a night since his wife passed. Every day felt like climbing a hill that never ended. His eyes burned, and he blinked fast to keep the tears from falling. He mouthed the word sorry to no one in particular. He did not know who he was apologizing to anymore. The cries echoed through the cabin, filling every empty space. Mark felt smaller with each second. 2 rows ahead, in seat 12A, a woman noticed something different than the others. Emily had heard the crying like everyone else, but she also heard the fear in it. She turned and saw Mark's face, pale under the red, his jaw tight as he fought to stay calm. She saw how carefully he held the baby, how desperate his eyes looked. Emily's heart squeezed in her chest. She was a single mother, too. She knew that look. She knew what it felt like to feel judged and alone in a crowded place. This was her first trip alone in years. Her son was finally old enough to stay with his grandparents for a few days. She should have been resting, enjoying the quiet. Instead, her body moved before her mind caught up. Emily unbuckled her seat and stood up. A few people glanced at her, curious. Others looked annoyed, expecting more trouble. She stepped into the aisle and walked back toward the sound of the crying. Her calm presence felt strange in the tense air. She stopped beside Mark and smiled gently, not forcing it, not judging. "Hi," she said softly. "I'm a mom too. Do you need a hand?" Mark looked up, startled. For a moment, he did not know what to say. Shame washed over him, followed by relief, so strong it almost knocked the breath out of him. He swallowed hard. "I don't know what to do," he whispered. "She's never cried like this." Emily nodded like she understood everything without needing more words. "May I hold her?" she asked. A few nearby passengers scoffed under their breath. Someone shook their head. Emily did not look at them. Her eyes stayed on Mark, patient and kind. His hands trembled as he slowly passed Lily to her. It felt wrong and right at the same time. Emily held the baby close to her chest. She hummed a low, steady tune and swayed gently in the narrow aisle. It was not fancy or special. It was something born from years of midnight cries and tired arms. Within moments, Lily's screams softened, her sobs slowed. Then, like a switch being turned off, the crying stopped. The cabin fell silent. Lily took a deep, shaky breath and rested her head on Emily's shoulder. Her tiny body relaxed. Mark stared, his mouth slightly open, unable to believe what he was seeing. His shoulders dropped for the first time since the plane took off. The weight he had been carrying pressed down all at once, and he had to grip the armrest to steady himself. Emily smiled at him. "Babies feel stress," she said quietly. "Sometimes they just need a fresh heartbeat." She did not hurry back to her seat. She walked slowly up and down the aisle, keeping Lily calm, while Mark wiped his face with his sleeve, overwhelmed by relief. A flight attendant paused beside them and whispered a thank you to Emily. She nodded and kept humming. For the first time that day, Mark felt something he had almost forgotten. He did not feel alone anymore. The plane cabin felt different now. The tension that had wrapped around every passenger like a heavy blanket had lifted slightly, replaced by a quiet awe. People whispered less and watched more. Mark's hands, once trembling, now rested loosely around his knees as he stole glances at Lily sleeping peacefully on Emily's shoulder. He couldn't stop staring. He wanted to memorize every little detail of this moment, the way her tiny fingers curled around Emily's shirt, the rise and fall of her chest, the soft rhythm that seemed to calm not just the baby but him too. Emily noticed his gaze and gave him a small smile. "She's okay now," she said gently. "You've been doing great. Sometimes babies just need to feel someone else's calm." Mark nodded, unable to speak at first. Words felt useless. He had wanted this trip to be smooth, to be strong for Lily, but it had started with a crash of chaos and fear. Now, for the first time since boarding, he could breathe. They sat together quietly, letting Lily rest in the aisle. Emily hummed softly, rocking her body just a little to keep the baby settled. Mark wiped his eyes again and whispered, "I thought everyone hated me. I thought I was failing her." Emily's hand rested briefly on his arm. "Not everyone," she said softly. "Most people just forget what it feels like to struggle. But it doesn't mean no one cares. And it certainly doesn't mean you're failing." For a while they let the silence fill the space between them. Mark's mind kept replaying the flight so far, the whispers, the judgmental glances, the panic he had felt in his own heart. And now, here was someone, a stranger, offering kindness, without question, without hesitation. It was almost too much to believe. Emily asked softly, "Where are you headed?" "North Carolina," Mark answered, "moving closer to my sister. She's been helping since. His voice faltered, and he swallowed hard. "Since my wife passed." Emily nodded, her expression serious but kind. "I know that feeling," she said quietly. "Raising a child alone, it's harder than most people can understand. I've been there. I felt invisible, exhausted, and scared that I wasn't enough." Mark looked at her, surprised by the honesty in her voice. In that moment, he realized that he wasn't just talking to a stranger. He was talking to someone who understood the weight of his world, someone who had lived through sleepless nights, endless worry, and the fear of failing the people you love most. They shared stories in fragments, bits and pieces of their lives that mattered most. Emily told him about her son, how she worked 2 jobs to keep him safe and happy, and how she sometimes felt like she was failing despite doing everything she could. Mark shared memories of his wife, the way she had laughed with Lily, the quiet nights at home that now felt like echoes. They didn't need to fill in every detail, just enough to recognize each other's strength, each other's pain, each other's courage. A few passengers watched quietly. Some even offered soft smiles. A few murmured apologies under their breath for the judgments they had passed earlier. One older woman shook her head slightly, whispering, "Wish there were more people like her." Emily only smiled, her focus still on the baby. Time passed slowly. The hum of the plane's engines filled the background, but the cries, The panic and the fear were gone. Lily's tiny hands relaxed in Emily's arms, her breathing steady. Mark felt a warmth spread through him that had nothing to do with the cabin air. It was the warmth of hope, of human kindness, of the simple truth that sometimes someone just stepping forward can change everything. Finally, Emily returned Lily to Mark's arms. The little girl stirred, blinking sleepily, then rested her head against her father's chest. Mark's heart swelled, a mixture of gratitude and relief, threatening to spill into tears again. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice breaking. I don't know how to repay you." Emily shook her head. "You don't repay kindness," she said gently. "You pass it on. That's all any of us can do." Mark looked at her, really looked at her. In the chaos of the flight, in the stress, in the judgment of strangers, she had chosen to act. She had chosen to help without asking for anything in return. And in doing so, she had given him something more than calm or advice. She had given him reassurance that he was not alone, that even in the hardest moments, there were people willing to step in, even strangers. The plane began its descent. Outside the window, the clouds shifted and revealed the faint glow of the setting sun over the horizon. Mark held Lily close, feeling her weight, her smallness, and her trust. Emily returned to her seat beside him, quietly watching as father and daughter settled into a new rhythm. "Can I keep in touch?" Mark asked softly, almost shyly. I mean, you saved me today." Emily laughed quietly, a soft, gentle sound. "You saved yourself," she said. "I just held a baby." Quote, but she handed him her number anyway, as a reminder that good people still existed. Mark held it tightly in his hand, knowing he would never forget the lesson of this flight. That sometimes the smallest act of kindness offered at the hardest moment becomes the thing that changes someone's entire day, or even their life. As the plane touched down, Mark felt something he hadn't felt in months. Hope. Not the big, sweeping hope of a new life, but the small, steady hope that came from human connection. And he promised himself he would carry it forward, for Lily, for himself, and for anyone who needed a hand. Even in the middle of a crowded plane, surrounded by strangers, Emily had reminded him that there was still good in the world, and that reminder would stay with him forever. The wheels of the plane touched the tarmac with a gentle bump, and a wave of relief swept through the cabin. The flight attendants moved with quiet efficiency, gathering bags and checking seatbelts. But in row 14, something far more meaningful was happening. Mark adjusted Lily in his arms, feeling her tiny heart beat against his chest. She was calm, almost sleepy, her little fingers curling around his shirt. It felt unreal, like a moment suspended outside of time. Emily sat beside him, her presence calm and steady, her hand occasionally brushing Lily's soft hair. The passengers around them seemed to notice the shift. Eyes that had once rolled now held curiosity, respect, and maybe a little awe. A few whispered words of apology to Mark. One older man gave Emily a nod, saying softly, "We need more people like you in this world." She simply smiled, her eyes reflecting quiet understanding. Mark exhaled deeply, letting the tension leave his body. He had boarded this flight anxious, fearful of judgment, and exhausted from months of sleepless nights. But now, with Lily peacefully resting and Emily sitting beside him, he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Connection. Not just to Emily, but to humanity, to the small but profound truth that people could still act with kindness without expecting anything in return. "Thank you," Mark whispered again, his voice shaking slightly. "I don't know what I would have done without you." Emily shrugged lightly, but there was warmth in her smile. "You were doing everything right. Sometimes all a child needs is a calm presence, even if it comes from someone new. You did your best. Don't forget that." For a long moment they sat together quietly, letting the moment sink in. Outside, the sun was dipping below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. It felt symbolic, like a promise that even after long, hard days, beauty could still exist. As passengers began to gather their belongings and stand, Mark realized he didn't want this moment to end. He wanted to remember the lesson of the flight, that fear, exhaustion, and judgment could be softened by a single act of kindness. Emily noticed his gaze and leaned slightly closer. "Can I keep in touch?" he asked, a little hesitantly. I mean, you made a difference today. I'd like to remember this." Emily laughed softly, a gentle, reassuring sound. "You saved yourself today. I just held a baby," she said. But she handed him her number anyway, a small gesture that said more than words could capture. "Remember," she added, "kindness is everywhere. Sometimes we just have to step forward." Mark smiled, tucking the paper carefully into his pocket. Lily stirred slightly, opening one sleepy eye, and Mark whispered her name. She responded with a tiny, soft coo and snuggled back against him. It was a quiet victory, but one that felt monumental. Outside the terminal, Mark took a deep breath of the crisp evening air. He watched as Emily walked away, her figure fading into the crowd of travelers, and he felt a profound sense of gratitude. He knew he would never forget this day, this stranger who had stepped into the chaos and turned it into calm. Mark turned to Lily, holding her close, and promised himself something. He would teach her about kindness. He would teach her about courage. He would teach her that even when life feels overwhelming, there are people willing to help, willing to step forward, willing to be a light in the middle of darkness. And as he lifted his bags and made his way toward the waiting taxi, he carried not just his daughter, but a renewed faith in the goodness of people. Sometimes he realized the smallest acts, a gentle touch, a soft hum, a willing hand, could change the world for someone in ways no one could measure. That Tuesday evening, on a flight that had started with tears and panic, ended with calm, hope, and the quiet reminder that humanity was still capable of extraordinary kindness. Mark smiled down at Lily, feeling her little hand brush against his cheek. "We'll be okay," he whispered, and for the first time in months, he truly believed it. The memory of that single mother, who had done the unthinkable by stepping into the chaos, would stay with him forever. It was a story he would tell Lily one day, not just about a plane, a cry, or a stranger, but about how a simple act of compassion can change everything. Because in the middle of a crowded, noisy world, sometimes all it takes is one person willing to care to make life feel a little lighter, a little brighter, and a lot more human.